It was very serendipitous. I always knew I liked people, so I decided to get a degree in psychology in college, and it was just dumb luck. It was literally an ad in the newspaper that led me to apply there. As I recall, I applied for a job at the UCLA research unit. Didn't get it, so I started volunteering there in '87. And I finally got hired by UCLA in '88, and I was there for 10 years. I think I left in '98, pretty much when they were turning off the lights. Our unit was pretty unique in that we did some kind of intensive research there, and the entire unit was manned by a combination of UCLA and state hospital staff, and everybody really just got along. There was a mission, a research mission, and everybody was on board and doing what they could. Then when I got there, I was kind of in awe of stepping into the state hospital, and there used to be a big sign out front of the Unit 45, which is now the police station, that said UCLA Clinical Research Unit, study for schizophrenia and psychiatric rehabilitation. And I just thought that was pretty impressive, so I said, I'm definitely going to try to do this. Tranquil, peaceful, beautiful, really. I mean, it's now the university, and I think the grounds are just stunning. And they haven't done much to the grounds, right? Sometimes I have difficulties figuring out what are the new buildings versus what are the old buildings. It's just a very picturesque place. My first title was psychometrist.
Yeah, I was there 2012 to 2016, and I studied performing arts theater. That was my major, and then my minor was communication. I don't know. I've been performing since I was born. Yeah, since I was born. I danced for 10 years, had a competitive dance for 10 years. In high school, I did musical theater, traditional theater, straight plays. It's always been a part of who I am, and so when I thought about going to college and actually studying something, I didn't want to waste $50,000 or whatever on whatever. I wanted to do what I wanted to do. Thankfully, I've been blessed with such supportive parents. And when it came time to choose college, my parents they took me to every single college that I wanted to go to because they said that you need to feel like you belong here. I wanted something smaller because I've been going to small private Catholic school my whole life. So I didn't want to just get thrown into the throes of whatever public school was. And so when I went to CI, I was like, oh yeah, this is it. And I literally just found it. I went to the CSU website and just clicked through all of the CSUs, and honestly, the name sounded really pretty. So I was like, and nobody's heard of it. And I'm the kind of person that has to do things nobody's heard of. So it was gorgeous. It was absolutely gorgeous. And I love that it doesn't look like a campus. It doesn't look like you're at college.
Typically, I would get there in the morning, and what we would do is the change of shift in the nursing station, talk about all the clients. After that, the day began, and we did a lot of behavioral research. The day was pretty regimented, supporting the patients to do whatever was on the schedule. Whether that was hygiene in the morning, free time. Back in those days, they used to be able to smoke in the building, so there's a smoke room. Throughout the day, there was token exchange times. So it was kind of supporting the routines that were kind of embedded within the unit. That's what we all did. If there was an active research program going on, I might be taking a client to do some sort of testing. We did all sorts of testing there, from neurocognitive assessments, many of which were done on computers. We also did psychophysiological testing, which involved, hooking them up to electrodes and doing things like that. So we were busy. There were skills training programs, groups. There was a rec group that happened. So their day was filled. The additional training I got, besides learning how to support people in the routines of the unit. Some of the additional training I got was, learning how to run a new computer program so we could test clients. But we got exposed to other units because we recruited for our research subjects. So we'd visit other units and review charts and talk to patients to see if they were met the criteria of our current research study. So there was that. And then we also provided consultation to other units where kind of a multidisciplinary team from our unit, including the psychiatrist, the psychologist, and usually me and maybe some residents, would go and evaluate and support other unit staff and other units across the hospital. So we got exposed that way too.
To be completely honest, for the first 3 months I was there, I was like actually depressed because I didn't want to leave my room. I didn't want to talk to anybody. And I'm not like a surface level person. So it was my first like slap in the face, like, oh my God, like I have to like make friends with people. Like, this is hard. I don't like it. And so I hid in my room for a long time. And I remember my first class was integrated theater or integrating music, dance, and theater with Catherine. And I remember walking in. Oh my God, how do I remember every outfit I wore in the first class? I was wearing like leggings and like this like white or gray shirt with a big smiley face on it. And I remember walking in, but I do remember very specifically opening the doors. Every theater has a smell. And every theater smells the same to me. I'm a very big like smell person. And when I walked in and I smelled the theater, I was like, oh, okay, I'm at home. Like, this is my comfort zone. This is my space. And like all those feelings of like being depressed and away from my family and scared and alone and sad and all that stuff. Like, I felt totally at ease and I was so comfortable and I was like, this is it. Like, I felt it. I totally forgot. I worked in campus recreation for my freshman year. I was like a front desk receptionist and I did that. I think, yeah, my entire freshman year I did that. After that, I became an orientation leader. I did that to 2013, 2014, and then 2016, they promoted me to senior orientation leader, so like overseeing the orientation team. My sophomore and junior year, I was a multicultural / intercultural student assistant. And then my senior year, I was student programming board vice president. And then also in my junior year, I was the director of events for student government. And then I also was a senator at some time. I'm sure there's something that I'm forgetting. But I think it's just an issue on college campuses in general to get students to be engaged when getting a degree is so necessary in today's environment. I think what challenged me the most was getting creative with the events because students will be engaged if they want to be engaged. You just got to know what they're looking for. So I noticed when I had the most creative events that I did or the most expensive events that I did, those were what drew them to it. So they'll be engaged if you give them the right thing to engage with. It was just a matter of, okay, well, how do I engage people who are studying like crazy and are hard to distract? Oh, free food, duh.
The research unit, I believe, started early 70s, and it was always run by Dr. Robert P. Liberman. And he was I think he was the first psychiatrist to really kind of jump on board of a discipline called applied behavior analysis. And him with his colleagues, primarily, especially in the early days, Chuck Wallace, who's a psychologist, did a number of behavioral therapy programs there and did research on. I think the unit was the center was particularly well known for the skills training modules that were developed there. A number of training modules were developed, such as social skills. One of the challenges of people with serious mental illness, particularly those with schizophrenia, they don't perform well in social situations. So the idea is that, if we teach them how to be socially appropriate, they'll improve their skills, and then in turn be able to establish, relationships outside the unit. Have friends, which is a noble goal in itself. So there are a number of modules that are developed there that kind of focused on that. Very early on, they did some research on modifying the delusional speech of psychiatric patients, something once thought to be the sole purview of medication, but no, they found that, by using strategic behavioral principles, they can reduce delusional speech in patients. There are other ongoing programs or research projects with regards to behavior therapy. Depending on who's on the unit, there is meal eating. A lot of patients have challenges eating. They like to stuff themselves. They eat rapidly, have poor manners, which maybe doesn't seem that important, but once they start eating fast, they're at risk for choking. So, helping them to eat appropriately, reasonably, was both provided good manners, but also reduce the risk of choking. Polydipsia. I mean, I could go on and on. So the unit and the center in total, when it was running, it was one of the most prolific in the world, actually. And a lot of very prominent people in the field currently came out of the research unit at Cam State. Well, I guess two of the most prominent clinicians and researchers for behavior family therapy both did their internship and postdoc on the research unit. Some of the pioneers in psychopharmacology were also at the research unit and the research center in general. The research that we did there from that little unit exponentially helped people with schizophrenia around the world. I mean, at this point right now, Dr. Lieberman's status is bigger in Europe and other countries than in the United States. With regards to, the research we did was especially the applied research we did, it was all to improve the quality of life of our patients. We did nothing aversive. We didn't do aversive anything to them. So to the extent that people have kind of a negative impression of the research unit, I just think they're kind of misinformed. All the people that participated in our research did so of their own consent. A critical feature of the research, especially with human populations, is getting informed consent. And if they were too sick to provide informed consent, their guardian would. No one was forced to participate in our research. Our program was very structured, and the way we supported the patients to follow that structure was through reinforcement. So the patients who are on our unit got a lot more goodies than the average patient. And back in those days, again, cigarettes and tokens, and they could buy things from our store. So that throughout the day they were provided with opportunities to get goodies. So and we were small, again. Usually there was 2 people to a room. So I think overall, I don't want to throw our other units under the bus, but I think patients who lived and participated at the research unit had a pretty good time. Relatively speaking, I think we produced a lot of valuable knowledge to the world in whole that helped people with serious mental illness.
I don't think I really knew why I liked performing or why I liked the theater. I just knew that I liked it, but I don't think I cared why I liked it because I was so, not like insecure, but so like desperate to have a purpose that I didn't care what it was or why I had it. I've learned a lot living on my own for almost 10 years now. Human connection, it's like finding the purest human connection is so hard to come across, and when I do find it, I cling to it. And when I'm on stage, like it's so weird because that's so scary to people, but that is where I'm the most comfortable. I love speaking in public. I love influencing people, sharing stories, storytelling. That's probably why I work where I do. And because when I'm on stage, that's the closest I get to feeling like I have a superpower. To influence somebody's emotions is such an incredible thing. And if you're lucky enough to have an intimate audience and you can see their reaction on their face, I can't even describe it. Like, it's just like I'm not myself. Like, the universe is speaking through me. Like, I'm channeling it. Like Martha Graham says, like, keep the channel open. Like, that's where my channel is open, and that's where I think I do the best work and the most influential work. Sharing that physical space with them, and then also the vulnerability that comes with it, because being vulnerable and empathy and all that stuff is just so hard to share. And when you finally do, you and that person are connected for the rest of your life. You may not ever see them again. You may not even speak to them again, but because you shared that moment with that person, you connected with them, that made you human, and you felt that love between each other. And that changes a person, whether it be big, whether it be small, but because you connected with that person, you are forever changed.
I think we developed relationships, or I did, kind of regardless of their needs or their disability. When you work with people that long in such a space, I think it'd be kind of hard not to develop some feelings, like part of your family, part of the hood, right? So yeah, some of the patients I know and see occasionally today, it really felt like kind of family there. You know, the professional staff, the doctors, the nurses, they love the patients. But that isn't to say there, could be one or two staff that abuse their patients, but that happens everywhere. That happens now. Doesn't necessarily have to be in a hospital. You read up of some of the failures of the group homes that house the seriously mentally ill in the community now. The neglect, and it happens everywhere. Anywhere where there's a power differential and there are people who are susceptible to abuse, it's unfortunately it's going to happen. In the community, I'm currently involved in some projects out in the community, some housing projects, and I come in contact with some old patients. I'm kind of involved nationally as well as to advocate for the care of the seriously mentally ill. I think initially for some of the residents, of the patients, it turned out well, because as we were emptying the hospital, there were some reasonably good programs and housing options that became available to them. And some of those have since become diluted, morphed, and I think on the whole, the way that the seriously mentally ill are treated now is pretty horrendous, both in California and nationally. A person is 10 times more likely to be incarcerated than to get a hospital bed. It's easier to get into Harvard than to get a hospital bed, and that's pretty much across the nation. The idea of deinstitutionalization was around in the 20s and 30s. I think what really kind of kickstarted our movement was when Kennedy signed the Community Mental Health Act in '63. And in conjunction with that, there were regulations developed that, from a financial standpoint, made closing hospitals and hospital beds better financially for the states. There's a provision in Medicaid law regulations called the IMD exclusion. And IMD, according to federal regulations, is any facility that has more than 16 beds that are occupied by the seriously mentally ill. And if there is such a facility, it can't get federal funding. So that kind of told the states, well, we're not getting federal funding. Why do we let's empty these beds. And there are graphs available that will show the precipitous drop of psychiatric beds across the nation or the individuals who are housed in psychiatric beds versus the number who are incarcerated with serious mental illness, and it it completely mirrors each other.
My parents took out the Parent Plus loan, so it's all in their name. I think I owe probably like 20,000 or something like that. But I never paid out of pocket every year. It was always a loan. So probably whatever the standard tuition is what I owe. I should really look into that and start paying them back. The only friend that I know that didn't take out loans is she's from back home up in Northern California, and that's because she worked her butt off all the time to complete her master's degree. But aside from her, all of my friends, I think, pretty much took out loans. On a college campus, loans or financial situations come up no matter who you are, and so pretty much everybody I talked to had them in every major. My first year I lived on campus, so a lot of my loans are from my first year. But I was fresh out of my parents' house, so I wasn't gonna like go on Craigslist and say, who wants to room with me? But because of that, I think I did the math and I was paying like $1,100 a month for living on campus. Yeah. And so I was like, that's not worth it. So I ended up moving off campus my sophomore to senior year. But because they only let us work part-time, so I had a lot of help from my parents. They would take out the Parent Plus loan to help me survive, or they would just help me throughout their own financial situation. But we all had that same complaint of, I can't afford food this week. What am I going to do? Like that kind of thing. But we always figured something out. We were a very creative bunch. Yeah, I do remember Monique Reyna. She was the student government president when I was SPB president or vice president. She, like, one of her big initiatives was to get a food pantry on campus because of that very reason that so many students are don't have the ability to get food. And I think it was passed like after she left or something like that. I don't know if it's still successful, but she was very passionate about it. I hate that people say, starving college student. I hate that phrase. I hate it a lot because just because you're in college doesn't mean you shouldn't be able to afford food. Like I had a roommate once who said that our house was going through something funky. I don't remember exactly what. And the landlord said, well, you're a college student, so you have to have that crappy house experience. And I'm like, I'm still a human being who deserves like a good space to live in. So I think the whole thing is just sad. And, but then I think of like, there are people who are not in college who have children and still can't afford to keep a roof over their head. Or I don't think it's just not necessarily a college campus thing. It's it's a big problem in general. But especially since you pay all the student fees and you pay so much to be there, I think there is just a little bit of responsibility put on the college to provide what they can for the students to set them up for success. But there was just always pushback from something, from the state not giving us money, or the higher ups not caring about our issue, or there's more important things to worry about. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but is food really like the least important thing you can think about right now? And I think in that sense, those people, like, there's a lack of empathy in that. And if they learned empathy, if they were in our situation and got rid of the starving college student thing, then I think there would have been a bigger response to it.
we make a distinction between serious mental illness and mental illness. Not to say that, mild depression isn't bad, but on the other end of the spectrum, we have people who really cannot care for themselves because of their mental illness. One of the misnomers about serious mental illness, is schizophrenia or severe bipolar disorder, is that it's not just an illness of thinking, like delusions or hallucinations. There's also concomitant cognitive impairments that occur. So not only do they think outlandish things like they're Jesus or they come from Mars, but also they have really what are probably best described as learning disabilities. They're not competent in their cognitions, like working memory or verbal working memory. And some of those, even further, are so sick that they don't know that they're sick. And I think those are the ones that we really need to look out for. But it's really hard. I mean, if you don't know you're sick, why would you go get help? If you're not good at independently going to your appointment, how could you get treatment? Besides even being aware that you needed treatment. There are just a lot of, even those that want to stay in treatment, there are tremendous barriers out there. Housing, especially in California, being number one, among the top, at least. Many are homeless, they're unaware they need help, and countless die every year because of exposure. People with mental illness, serious mental illness, are typically die 20 to 30 years sooner than the general population. Again, the idea of deinstitutionalization and community treatment, as envisioned, I think, by Kennedy in the 60s, that's a great idea. I really do think that a large proportion of those that were in state hospitals at that time could be effectively treated in the community, supported. The problem is those systems of supports were never fully developed in the community. So we essentially kicked all these people out of the state hospitals to nothing. But that's not to say that there aren't some who, and we're talking 2 to 4% of them seriously mental ill population. Some will require that level of care indefinitely. They're just not able to be successful in the community. But that's a really, really small portion. Especially now, there's nothing out there for them. Especially the ones who are so sick that they don't know that they're sick. There's no effective treatment out there for them. We heard things were kind of moving in that direction, but then to finally get the end date was kind of rough. Because the unit was closed, but because I was UCLA staff, I stayed there working on various projects that weren't related to the research unit. Yeah, it just became depopulated. Because the unit had closed, all my friends from the state hospital side, they were all gone. So it was kind of lonely there. As I recall, I was pretty heartbroken, numbed, really. I think as much for the patients as for myself. And, our unit, it was kind of like a family there. And it kind of broke up, or a band, it kind of broke up the band, right? It was kind of traumatic that time.
of your easy tranquility. I turn away the sad impossibility of your smile. I'd sit there in the sun of the things I like about you. I'd sing my songs and find out just what they mean to you. But most of all, I'd like you to be unaware. And I just wander away, trailing palm leaves behind me, so you don't even know that I've been there.
I think that because we were so underfunded, now that this is not me saying don't give us money, but the pro to having to work with what we got made us love the craft even more. However, going into the real world, there's a lot that I don't know. I didn't know that regular theater programs get a stage combat class or a costume class or lighting design. Like we didn't really have any back of house training per se. We had acting 1, 2, and 3. We had directing. We had integrating dance, music, and theater. Musical theater if you wanted to take it. That's not all the classes I had to take. A lot of them were like reading plays, and that was pretty much it. And I didn't realize how much we didn't have until I went into the real world and talked to other theater performers. And also the fact too that our theater was a raised platform and some bleachers. That kind of sucked. I struggled with the feeling of feeling cheated out of a real theater experience because I wanted to be on par with everybody else. I wanted to be as successful as everybody else. I wanted to say I had the same experience as everybody else. But at the same time, I've always been one to want to stand out from everybody else. And I know that when I go on stage and perform and do my thing, I can do that because we didn't have a big fancy set to distract everybody from our poor acting. We only had us and the black stage, and you better show up or else people are going to leave because it's very easy to leave that small little room. Especially being in the theater department, we were competing with the sciences big time. I remember Sierra Hall going up and I was so devastated because I was like, all we want is a working theater. And we got an entire new science building, which is great. You know, it's a big program and, you know, I get it. You have to serve the bigger student population. However, you know, it felt like being in the theater department, because we were so small, we weren't noticed. And I tried to use my voice in ASI to bring representation to that, to fight to be favoritized, if that makes sense. We didn't, as a theater department, we didn't try to compete with the sciences, especially with Arts Under the Stars. We tried to work our best with them and use, because science is still art. And I don't necessarily feel like anybody that was in the science or theater program, like the students, there wasn't a competitive nature between the students. We were in our own separate worlds. Oh, cool, you want to work together on this project? Great, awesome, neat. When it came to money, especially being on the budget committees, yes, I did see some kind of competitive nature there. And I remember this conversation I had. I was on the budget committee for, it was basically supplies for the classroom. And we needed new dance floor things, and we weren't getting the money for it. And if we didn't have the dance floor, we wouldn't, or mirrors, it was a mirror problem. And if we didn't have the mirrors or the dance floor, we couldn't do the class. And so instead of waiting to be approved for the money, the professor went ahead and just ordered it anyway. And then we were kind of forced to give her money. And I don't remember his name, unfortunately it escapes me, but I remember he was saying that he was mad. He was like, why would you do that? And then I rose my hand and I was like, I'm a performing arts major. We did that because if we didn't, you wouldn't have listened and we wouldn't be able to do our class. So I did see some kind of like criticizing of other departments. I think it comes with the tension of trying to be as successful, especially since CI was so new still. There was a lot of tension because we wanted to be successful. We wanted to be noticed. CI is the little guy when it comes to the CSU system. But it did feel, we had so many factors against us at CI that it did feel like there was more tension than normal.
But we also have commitment laws, and this is another big area, that basically say the current commitment law is you can be committed on a 5150, which is just the name, for emergency evaluation, psychiatric hold, right? If you're a danger to self or others. So that's the only time the state, Big Brother, can come in and intervene for someone that's obviously sick. Our laws aren't written to help people to prevent those things. Our laws actually are written to demand those things. You have to be a danger to get help, which is kind of explains why so many of the mentally ill are in prison, incarcerated, right? Many of us advocates look for those tragedies because that's the only time people will pay attention. If we run an op-ed about, let's do this great mental health program and blah, 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 because it'll make people happier and improve quality of life. No one's going to read that, right? But if there's a tragedy, and they'll get people's attention. People are hesitant to intervene because, it's their right. It's their right to be sick. It's their right to be talking about Jesus on the street corner, right? So I think that's one extreme. I think most of the advocates that I associate with say that's not really, they're not exercising their freedom. If you're mentally ill, you do not have the competencies to exercise your freedom. It's only when you're effectively treated that you can truly exercise your freedoms, right? There's a saying, providing effective treatment helps people with serious mental illness become free of the bastille of their psychosis. So instead of recognizing that someone has a right to be screaming on the corner, yelling about Jesus, we should recognize that they also have a right to be effectively treated. And it's a little discriminatory. It's a lot discriminatory for people with serious mental illness. No one would question a group of people, a policeman, a fireman, an EMT, a nurse, to go running out tracking down a patient with Alzheimer's who went wandering out of their facility. Right? That's just obvious, and he's sick. But that serious mental illness is a biological brain disease.
I see a lot of diversity in public education. I see a lot of a willingness to help, and I see a lot of opportunity in it too. Mainly the diversity thing. I came from, like I said, I went to private school for 12 years. I think the biggest thing for me was the diversity that was introduced to it because, CI was a Hispanic serving institution, and I came from a predominantly Hispanic neighborhood, but the schools I went to were predominantly white. And so when I moved into that public education sphere, I got to see all different kinds of people, and that was really cool. That was that really changed my perception a lot, and it helped me become more empathetic, helped me become more outspoken to speak up for people who have maybe less than I do or have different strengths and weaknesses than I do, and to value people even more and to create that theatrical human connection that I really wanted to. Just the relationships that I built at CI are just so important to me because of our shared experiences that CI gave us. And my theater people, we really had a time. We had a great time, and those are my forever people. Those people are going to be in my life forever. And I always tell people, whenever I had my new group of students at orientation, I always said CI is not a school, it's an experience. But you have to let it be an experience.
It's easy on a number of levels to disregard, not pay attention to those with really severe mental illness. They don't vote. They ain't got no money, right? The only time we pay attention to them is when they're blocking the entrance to our business. We seem to always be reactive as opposed to proactive. If we want to say, let's build this university, let's fund this university and get really smart people out of there, right? Or let's be safe and lock up more people. Who's going to get the funding? Law enforcement or the university? I think it's always easier to scare the population and provide more money for law enforcement, incarceration, than it is to do the other side. It costs as much to keep a mentally ill person in a prison as to go to Harvard. Cam State was, in my mind, a fantastic institution. We provided a lot of valuable critical information in terms of research, invaluable support and care of people who really needed it. And I think it's a tragedy that it and institutions like it are gone and are going. I hope as we move on and move forward that more of the population in the U.S. understands that and become committed to righting that wrong. And I think that's especially salient for the universities across the nation, including Channel Islands, whose history comes from that.
If there were no arts at all, in general, we wouldn't have food. We wouldn't have a house. We wouldn't have basic necessities, because art is in everything. When people say theater or the arts don't matter and they don't deserve to be paid for, then don't pay for it and see what happens. People won't have empathy. People won't know how to be a human being. They won't know how to process their emotions. They won't be creative. And their creativity is so undervalued in workplaces across the world, because you need to be creative. You have to, in order to solve problems, you got to be creative. You got to have some kind of artistic thing. And I think people often don't understand what the definition of art really is. People think art is, theater, painting, or music or dance. That they often compartmentalize it like that. And they don't often see that art doesn't necessarily have to be those things. If you created something, that's art. And so I think the real problem when people say, oh, we need to stop paying for the arts, they're not understanding what art really does for you, because they're so used to it, and they don't know the value of it because they take it for granted. I'm not out here to convince. You cannot change somebody's mind. If somebody thinks the theater and the art shouldn't be valued, all right, then that's probably the way they grew up, and I know I'm not going to be able to change their mind. But like I said earlier, if you don't think it should be valued, if you don't think it should be funded, then don't, and then we'll just suffer the consequences later.
station, someone called your name. In the street I heard children laughing. They all sound the same. Wonder, could you ever know me? Know the reason why I live? Is there nothing you can show me? Life seems so little to give. Once I climbed to the top of a mountain and ate the wild fruit there. Fell asleep until the moonlight woke me, dreaming I could touch your hair. Isn't every